Hi guys, in this tutorial I'll be showing you how to assemble this woodland tabletop fairy. This is my second tabletop fairy design. Here is my first tabletop fairy. I call her Livia. This new woodland fairy doesn't have a name yet. I hope it's obvious why I call her a woodland fairy, but maybe I'll hear back from you guys that it's not and then I'll name her. But for now, she's just a tabletop woodland fairy. And on that note, I should mention that I have another woodland fairy, also with no name other than Woodland Fairy. I know I'm so good with names. Although this one is different from the tabletop fairy because it hangs, so hopefully that's enough for you guys to distinguish between the two. I haven't made a tutorial video yet for these woodland hanging fairies, but that's coming, probably sometime in early 2022. I do have a step-by-step photo tutorial though on my blog. So back to our woodland tabletop fairy. Similar to my hanging woodland fairy, I wanted this fairy to have really dramatic wings. So I added this lush foliage in her wings and I extended it like a vine to hang down over the surface she's sitting on. On her other side, the vine is shorter, and this is for no other reason than avoiding being too symmetrical. When you assemble your fairy, feel free to use any combination of vines. Your fairy doesn't have to look exactly like mine. You can even leave out the vines if you prefer. Okay, let's get started on making this fairy. Here are the materials you'll need. The X-Acto knife is optional. Any sharp object will work in its place. And similar to my other projects, I'll be using double-sided tape that has lining on it, and I'll provide a link in the description below. And for glue, I'm using white glue, but you'll see later that this is also optional. And everything else is standard crafting materials. Now let's go over what you'll see in your downloaded folder. Inside your main folder, you should see these three folders. This fairy here is in the design folder, and I include her for anyone who wants to use the flat art, say, for printing on t-shirts or making posters or cards. In the vines folder, you'll find the SVG file that you can use to cut the foliage for your fairy's wings. There are 4 different vines, and as I said earlier, you can use any combination of these for your fairy. And lastly, in your cutouts folder is where you'll find the SVG files to cut out your fairy's body. Inside the cutouts folder are 2 more folders, one with the fairy's body attached to the wings and one with the fairy's body separated from her wings. You can use whichever file you prefer. Some people like to have their fairy wings a different color from the body, so I included that option. Now, just a couple notes about these fairies. Each of these fairy bodies in each file may look the same, but they're actually not. If you place them directly on top of each other, one of the legs sticks out more than the other, so keep that in mind. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that if you're using something like glitter paper, which is one-sided, make sure that you cut mirror images of the fairies and the wings. So if you were to rotate this fairy so that her head is upright, she would be facing the same way as this fairy, and we don't want that if we are using something like glitter paper. Instead, you need to select one fairy and flip it so that it's facing the other fairy. I've already flipped these wings here so you can cut them as is. And again, this is only if your paper is single-sided. And this will all make sense shortly when we do the assembly. And finally, let me just talk about the fold lines. I get the most questions about the fold lines because they seem to be the trickiest part in all the different cutting software out there. Notice the dotted lines on the fairies' bodies here. In my file, they're red, but I think they show up in black like you see here for most of you. But the critical issue is that they show up as solid lines for many of you and not dotted lines like you see here. So what you need to do, and I know a lot of you know this already, but I just want to go over it for those who don't know. Before cutting, you'll need to select these lines and change them into score lines or dotted lines. And to do that, you may need to click on the fairy's body and ungroup so that you can select just the lines on their own. And if this doesn't work for you, feel free to send me an email. I'm always happy to help. Okay, now that we've got the logistics out of the way, let's get started on making our fairy. So let me show you how the cutouts look. Here are the 4 vines cut out of green cardstock. I like to use 60 to 80 pound cardstock. Anything heavier than that I find gets harder to cut these intricate designs. And here are the cutouts of the fairy bodies. Today we are going to make a white fairy with wings attached, but let me show you quickly how to attach the wings if you're making them in a different color. Here are my fairy bodies with the detached wings. I'm using regular cardstock, so there was no need to cut out mirror images of the body or the wings. I just cut them out exactly as they are laid out in the file. So the first thing you do is fold both wings at the fold lines. Then lay them out facing each other so you know what side to work on. Next, take some double-sided tape and cut off a strip that's about the same size as the band on each wing. If you're using glitter paper, I would recommend using white glue for this step. Double-sided tape doesn't stick as well on glitter, and you'll just have to give some time for the glue to dry before moving on from this step. So place some tape on each wing band. And now gather your fairy bodies and turn them so they're facing each other. And remove the lining on the tape if you have the lining, and it'll help to enhance that fold for this stage. And you'll notice a little sharp bump on the back of the fairy, and that's where you'll line up the top of the wing, and then also align the back of the fairy against that wing fold line. And now just repeat that with your other fairy. And your fairy bodies are intact and you're ready to move on with the rest of the assembly. Here is the white fairy I'm going to make today, and this is how the 2 fairy bodies will be attached together. The first thing you want to do is fold all the fold lines on the fairy body. For this step, it doesn't matter which way you fold, we're just enhancing the fold lines, but eventually all the folds on each body will fold away from each other. Next, we're going to place a strip of double-sided tape along the wing fold line. I recommend using tape with lining on it, which I'll link below. The length of this area is about 1 1/4 inch, so cut your tape as close to that length as you can. The tape I'm using is just under 3/4 of an inch wide, and this is too wide for what we need, so I'm going to cut mine in half. You'll need your tape strip to be about 5/8 of an inch wide, or if you're working in metric, it's about 1 centimeter. And you'll need 2 strips of approximately the same length and width. So take your tape and place it along the wing fold line on the fairy's body. Now remove the lining, and we're going to attach the vines to the tape. Here are my 2 short vines. Notice one is a little fuller than the other, having more leaves. This is the one I'll start with. Each vine has a bit of a curve to it, and I've turned this vine so the curve is going to the left, and place it in a spot near the fairy's head. It's important to make sure no part of the vine is sitting on the fairy's head. We are overlapping the wings, but not the head area. And as you can see, the bottom branch of the vine is sitting on the tape. And next I'm going to work with the shorter of the 2 long vines. This one I'm going to place near the bottom of the wing, and again rotate it to make sure that no part of the vine is overlapping the fairy's dress. So this first set of vines that I've placed down is going to fold out in the same direction as the wing. Now I'm going to take the second of the 2 shorter vines and place it somewhere in the center of the tape. And for this one, I've turned it so that the curve is facing to the right. And finally, take the longest vine and place it near the bottom of the wing. Once again, make sure no part of it is sitting on the dress area. And these 2 vines will fold in the opposite direction of the first 2. Next, take your second strip of tape, cut it if you haven't already done so, and place it directly on top of the first strip. Press down hard to really secure the vines in. Then take your second fairy and align it directly on top. Once you have your fairies aligned, hold down one end with one hand and lift the top fairy to reveal the tape underneath. Then use a sharp object like an X-Acto knife to remove the tape lining. Then press down along the tape. Now we have our two fairy bodies attached, and the two spots that are not attached are the skirt area and the head. At this point, you can either use glue or tape to finish your fairy. If you use tape, you'll place a piece along here and another piece in the head area, and this should be enough to secure the rest of the fairy together. I'm going to glue the rest of my fairy bodies together, so I'll show you how to do that next. Dispense some white glue into a small bowl. You'll need about a pea-size amount. Next, brush glue onto the skirt area of the bottom fairy. At this point, it'll be helpful to once again enhance the folds at the skirt and the legs. The fold lines will help you keep track of where your glue goes. No glue should be placed beyond those two fold lines. And once you have the area completely covered in glue, press the two fairies together. Now flip your fairy over, open it up, and brush glue onto the head area. Try to reach right into her chest area to get glue into that space. And once you have the area covered in glue, press the two heads together. Also, just go back to the skirt area to make sure all the parts are still attached. And open the skirt and legs up to make sure they don't get glued together by excess glue that's seeped out. And your fairy assembly is finished. Now I'll show you how to open the wings and set the vines. To help her sit nice and flat, make sure that both her skirt folds are folded all the way up to her body. Now to open her wings, peel open each layer at a time, starting with one wing and moving to the vines. Remember, I placed 4 vines for my fairy, so 2 will open up with each wing. You don't really need to completely pry open the vines to each side. I like them to sit closer to center to fill in that space. You can also give the vines some dimension by slightly twisting or bending each leaf. Now let me show you how to set her up. If you place your fairy down on a flat surface at this point, she'll probably not sit very flat like mine. So the first thing is to make sure her skirt can sit at a perfect right angle by folding it again upwards towards her body. And next you need to curve the vines at the spots where they curve under her wings. Then bend the long vine at the point where it starts to hang over the table, like this. Now I'm going to spin her to the other side and curve the other vine. And just keep tinkering with the bending until she sits flat. And once you get her to sit flat, your fairy is done. I hope you guys enjoy making this fairy. I know my videos have long intros. Most of my projects are actually really easy to make once you get the logistics out of the way. And many of you are beginners with your cutting machines and the software, etc. So I try to cover the parts that I get the most questions about. And I just want to say a quick thank you to everybody who's subscribed to my channel. I know a lot of you found me this past week through my Christmas trees video, so I really appreciate you supporting me. And of course, a big thank you to everybody who's purchased my designs. Bye everyone!